I wanted to talk about the possibility of American intervention because I do think it is rather likely. But due to the assets moved into the region, I think the scenarios are rather limited. That is to say that I don't think that the people on Twitter posting about ground invasions or us going in and toppling the regime and this being the big one are being realistic to the resources that are in the region. If you look right here, this is from the Atlantic, but they took this from the AEI's Critical Threats Project from the Institute of the Study of War. Of course, ISW, which is either, your beloved or your most despised if you're into Asen enough. Either way, you could see that the majority of the assets in the region are air assets and naval assets. Now, with air assets and naval assets, that means you can deploy aircraft from the sea, aircraft from air bases in the region. We currently have like F-22 fighter craft like around Israel, where we don't usually have that in that area. It seems that we are amassing aerial and naval assets beyond what we would usually have in the area, and they're being placed in locations that would signify a strike program against Iran. But if you look, there's not significant ground forces. There are some ground forces for some ground strike capabilities that could be available, but nothing that is comparable to, say, the special forces that were put in place before going into Venezuela and blackbagging Maduro, or something that is comparable to an invasion force before Iraq, or anything that could actually get us to the capital of Tehran and bring down the religious clerics that rule society. There's nothing like that. So I think any suggestion of a ground invasion, any suggestion of a direct on-the-ground intervention at this point is complete hogwash. And I think Trump's instincts, his political instincts, is generally against stuff like this. Not that he would never be for it, but it's generally against it. And I'm sure that even Pete Hegseth would be able to find a YouTube video that could explain to him before a big meeting where they have to talk about a foreign affairs issue that would say, hey, golly gee, Mr. Hegseth, there sure is a lot of mountains in Iran. Oh, well, golly gee, Mr. Hegseth, there sure is a pretty young population in the country that are fighting age. Oh, golly gee, Mr. Hegseth, there sure are a lot of small arms that could be dispersed amongst the country. And this is not to say that Iran is like a superpower that could march into any country. That is to say that it would be painful for anyone that march into Iran, no matter what plan you use. And it's going to hurt. And whether or not the regime has a lot of support, the IRGC is so deeply embedded into society that any campaign to overthrow the regime would mean fighting with the IRGC in urban environments and fighting with at least sections of the armed forces in mountainous terrain that would lead likely to a large amount of casualties to whoever is leading the spearhead of this operation. And if Trump wants to do this unilaterally, as he's engaged in many operations before, that would mean U.S. service member coming home in boxes. So I think Donald Trump is going to have political instincts against that outcome. So that's not what I think he's going to do. And I also don't think that he is of the belief that there is literally no other option but that. I think that if he was cornered, maybe he would consider a scenario like that. If he felt cornered, not necessarily that he was actually cornered, but if he felt cornered, that he perceived he was cornered, that he would do something like that. What I think is much more likely is a series of strikes to bring about one of two outcomes. Well, a few outcomes are possible. Let me name all the outcomes, but then I'll say what are the most likely outcomes. One outcome is the overthrow of the regime from the inside. That it could be a targeting of the police infrastructure and the IRGC infrastructure and a lot of the armored vehicle storages in order to give the protesters a fighting chance and to give factions of the armed forces maybe the chance to desert. I think this is the least likely of all of the scenarios. I don't think it's impossible, which is why I'm listing it, but I think this is the least likely of all the scenarios. I think that if Trump was serious about overthrowing the regime in the immediate term, he wouldn't have waited until way after he said he would strike if they killed anybody. After they killed anybody, he probably would have striked pretty rapidly, or at least when he gathered the resources necessary to strike in the region. And at the rate that they're doing it, he's giving them a lot of time to kill and arrest a lot of people that seemingly would be helpful if you really wanted to overthrow the religious clerics that rule society. So, I mean, it's not to say that Trump couldn't try to do something and execute something in a haphazard or unorganized way, which is part of the reason why I still leave this as a possibility, because I could just see this as them waiting to gather enough resources to make an attempt on it. I just don't think that even if they were to try it, that they have the resources necessary to do it. What would require a campaign if this was to succeed? If it was to succeed, the most likely scenario of success would be a long extended campaign that keeps the army down, keeps the armored vehicles burnt, keeps any of the larger guns that they have available disabled, keeps the air force from going against their own people, etc. Fights the IRGC when anytime they gather or consolidate. But this would take months and months and months. And we have resources in the region. I don't believe we have resources in the region for a unilateral campaign like that. I will say Israel, of course, has all of their assets in the region. And if we were to use the entirety of the assets that we have in the region, and Israel was to use everything at their disposal, which, considering that Iran is not their only security threat, that is not necessarily the most likely scenario. And we were also move other resources into the area, then maybe, but again, everything I'm drawing here is very long odds, far-fetched, and I don't think is the most likely scenario. Uh, there is a possibility that this is an attempt to get him to stop killing protesters. While I said that the overthrow of the regime was the least likely scenario, I think this is even more unlikely, because this is something that he directly referenced before, and then he accepted just them not hanging like 80 people after they suspended their hangings, not ended, suspended their hangings. So I don't think that I don't think it's that. What I do think is most likely is that this has to do with the atomic weapons program of Iran. This has to do with the fact that the Iranian government has enriched uranium up to 60%. And whether it's buried in those destroyed facilities, whether it's been moved elsewhere, the United States government does not want that for reasons of nuclear nonproliferation. The United States is still embarrassed after North Korea was able to attain an atomic weapon, and North Korea showed that any nation really with enough determination could do that with enough time and determination and dedication of resources. And so the United States wants to get ahead of this before Iran gets it and is able to have atomic parity with an American ally in the Middle East, Israel, as well as further degrading the atomic non-nuclear standard, the atomic non-proliferation standard around the globe, as well as, of course, Iran, Pakistan, India, Israel, all in that belt. It just seems like just putting too many mousetraps down. One is bound to go off, might be the logic. So I think that this is probably the main focus of this campaign. And I do want to say one major thing about this, and this is the main thing I've been saying about this. Trump said the program was annihilated. Now, I said after he said that it was annihilated, that if it is annihilated, then will we have to come back and annihilate it again? And if we do, how long will it be before we have to come back around and annihilate it again, so they don't pick up the program where they left off, learn from their mistakes, and each time harden their program, making it more and more and more difficult to disable? Because the fact of the matter is that we can do it every time. Every year we can blow it up again and again and again and again. We have to get it every single time. Every single time we have to figure out where the program is, disable it, know that we disabled it, know that we got all of it, know that we didn't miss any secret facilities, know that we took out enough of their scientists, know that we did all those things. All they have to do is succeed in getting there one time. And if they can, then they're there, then they have it. And so this game only really works if we're willing to just like endlessly kick the can down the road, which eventually we will either trip up or something will go wrong. That's why the only other scenarios are, besides that, is either negotiate or topple. If you don't want them to have an atomic weapon, it's either endless can kicking, negotiate, topple. Can kicking, negotiate, topple. Can kicking, negotiate, topple. Where's the Trump administration been so far? In the can kicking stage, hoping that the toppling stage will just kind of happen on its own. So I think that we're probably going to get more can kicking. We're going to get a re-annihilation. We double annihilated the Iranian atomic weapons program. Isn't that beautiful, guys? We double annihilated it. Can we get a shout out from one of Trump's biggest stars? I'm sure we have a cool clip here to show like the power of the government.
And I said, I'm not scared of a germ. I used to snort cocaine off of toilet seats. And I know this disease will kill me.
Right.
Okay, maybe not that one. Okay, but I'm sure we'll work on the clips. Okay, we're trying to get a more diverse section of clips here. We're really trying to work on improving our selection of clips. And I want you guys to please be forgiving. So I think we're in the re-annihilation stage. We're gonna re-annihilate the program, and after re-annihilating the program, we're gonna continue to try to pressure the Iranian government, hoping that the pressure on the Iranian government will get them to eventually give up enrichment altogether and give that enriched material to the United States, which is the current American position. Now, the real question to me, and this is the area that I don't know, and I'm going to put the question mark out there. The real question to me is, in these negotiations, which are ongoing right now, before we get to a re-annihilation stage and we start bombing again, or we do the can kick and we have to watch them try to figure out a new way to enrich the program, is whether or not the Trump administration can find solace in something besides getting rid of the program in its entirety, in its completion. Because if it accepted something beneath that, could they just not say, hey, this is not an Iran deal 2.0? Did you not just toss out the Iran deal just to do another Iran deal? And I think that's the big fear in the conservative intelligentsia, is basically letting the Iranians get away with it. Because if they called out Obama for it, then got into power, did the same thing, that would be worse than the naivety of Obama on the issue. If you're coming from the viewpoint that, we cannot negotiate with them. Because from your position, it's like, okay, we can't negotiate with them, but let's do it anyway. Well, if you can see what's coming at you and you still don't move, that's worse than if you don't see it coming. At least in my view. Either way, though, they don't want to make the same mistake as Obama. They don't want to have, at least from their view, a Iran deal 2.0. And so they want a complete annihilation of the program. And an actual annihilation would mean them giving up the enriched material and them shutting down all of the facilities. And the program being done, the scientists being dismissed, and that being the end of that. And all record of it, all the files essentially being burnt, I imagine, if not handed over with the enriched material to the United States. This seems to be the working U.S. demand, as in the public-facing demand. Whether or not it's what they're floating as the realistic demand behind closed quarters, that is what the government is saying their demand is. Now, there is something you can do besides that. You could go for 20% enriched uranium for medical purposes, or 3.5 instead of the 60% for civilian purposes. If you were to bring down the enrichment to 3.5 or to 20%, that's far from the 60% it's at now, which is a lot closer to the enrichment of 80% or roughly 80% that you would need in order to weaponize radioactive material, in order to get the type of weapons that North Korea has developed and that Iran already has a ballistic missiles program to attach this, incoming bomb to this still to be developed atomic warhead. Not to mention the Iranian ballistic missile program is still also up and running, continuing to develop. And that's also another component of this negotiation, which is the Trump administration, on top of wanting the Iranian government to give up their enriched material, on top of them wanting to get rid of their program and its civilian capacity altogether, also wants them to basically neuter their ballistic missiles program that they have used during recent strikes against Israel, which I think to the current Iranian government is probably a non-starter. A non-starter. Who knows if you could get an enriched, really an agreed to and monitored deal that both sides are actually semi-respecting, where the Iranians go down to 20% or to 3.5%. I would like to hope that is the case. I would like to hope that is a wiggle room that can help us avoid a war, getting down to that 3.5%, getting down to a civilian capacity that's heavily monitored every day, 24/7 by the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency. That's what I would like to think will end up being the wiggle room. But I think that's less likely. I think the Iranians are going to want to either find some middle ground where they can save face, or possibly in the future, if the Americans go back on their promises, which they think the United States probably will do, maybe a few of them at least think, then they can get the material back by handing the material instead of to the United States. One of the suggestions the Iranians are making in negotiations is that they can hand that material over to the Russian Federation. Now, the last administration, I don't think would have entertained that. This administration, I'm going to say, is not going to entertain that. But just due to what I know about this administration, I will say it does feel at least slightly more likely that they would be willing to entertain that scenario. Another thing that could be offered, and I think that this is an area that the Iranians should have more wiggle room on, and they actually not only should have, as in I think they will have that wiggle room, or that wiggle room should be, like, it makes sense if it would be available, but also should, as in this is a policy prescription, that there shouldn't be a sunset clause. If there's an agreement where the Iranians get to keep their atomic program after they had already made clear the pathways towards an atomic weapon, where they went up to 60% enrichment, if they're going to be able to keep a civilian program, then it would make sense, in order to both sweeten the deal for Trump to make it different than the Iran deal, which didn't have a no sunset clause. By having a no sunset clause, you sweeten the deal and make it longer lasting. So this is a deal that should hopefully last the ages. So it helps better contribute to nonproliferation, as well as allowing the deal to be sweetened up for Trump, so he could say, I got something that Obama didn't. And if it does have a no sunset clause, that does make it, assuming you get everything that we used to and this as well, that would make it, at least in that aspect, slightly better than the Iran deal of the past, at least in concept.